and I will be eternally grateful to the freedom truckers. Because
nobody in Parliament, nobody was standing up for us. No.
You've got these two groups of people that were not particularly involved in the formation of the convoy or much of the freedom movement in 2021.
Thank you so much, Phil. You're awesome for bringing the man, paying attention to what's going on. You've got your eye on the whole media of what's going on in Canada while you're able to hold a thread of what's happening in the U.S. and the rest of the world. You've got a great brain for this, bro.
A video clip surfaced from June of last year when he was running in his leadership campaign.
You have to be a member of the Conservative Party by Friday. So get your membership at my website, year4pm.ca.
No U.S. As soon as he's seen that, the whole telemetry of the situation changed now. All I can say is we need to find out what it is.
There's a shot here.
One question.
Oh, yeah. Fire away. Yes. Yes. I haven't read it.
And here we have Pierre Poilievre standing in front of a Mason's symbol.
The mainstream media isn't picking it up. Why? The answer is very simple. Because the executives of most of the mainstream media deserve to go to prison.
I did not call people who were unvaccinated names.
What just happened? Did somebody just drop dead?
Of May. Now, today's talk is concerning and bemusing. It's based around this document here. It runs to about 58 pages. This is the full document here I've put on the screen. You can download it. It's now in the public domain, and I'll put the link. And it's from the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia, which controls their drugs and vaccination policy. Now, the key thing is that this document has only been released as a result of freedom of information requests. And even now, it's still quite highly redacted. So if we have a look at this here, redacted. Redacted. You know, really it has to be asked, why is there still a lot of material in this document related to the Pfizer vaccine? Why is a lot of this still redacted? Because the whole point of science is that we share it and open it up to peer review. The scientists all around the world desperate to get a hold of this information, but a lot of it's still redacted. But a lot of it isn't. And we're going to be looking at the stuff that isn't. Bear in mind, all the information we're going to be talking about here was known before Australia authorised the vaccines, January 2021. Now, this is done largely on Pfizer data, but written by the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. So given that it comes from Pfizer, this is international information. I think we can be certain that this information was on Anthony Fauci's desk, or equivalent information. I think we can be confident it was on Chris Whitty's desk and our scientific officer's desk, Patrick Valence's desk. I think this information was completely known. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get straight onto it. The first thing I want to look at is the distribution of the lipid nanoparticles. We were told it stayed in the injection site, I can now tell you on YouTube, because this is an official government document, I'm now free to discuss this. As far as what's in that document, I can discuss, because we can discuss official government documents. That the lipid nanoparticles are widely distributed, very widely distributed. This is from page 44 of the document. Now, there is no need to take any of this, my word for any of this. Check it out for yourself. It's a complicated document, but it's written in English. If you spend a bit of time, you can work it out. Rats given intramuscular injection. Now, bear in mind, this is intramuscular injection, not intravenous injection, intramuscular injection. The concentration of radioactive lipid nanoparticles reached peak level in the plasma. That's in the blood, of course. 8.9 micrograms lipid equivalent per mil. That sounds high to me. Now, do not be alarmed. The vaccines are not radioactive. But what they do is to analyse the distribution. They put a radioactive label onto the lipid nanoparticles, which can be done quite readily in experimental situations. And then rather than go and count the individual nanoparticles through an electron microscope, they can just see how much radiation is there. It's a standard technique. So the vaccines are not radioactive. Don't get the wrong idea. But there's plenty of things that are pretty concerning. It reached these high levels in the plasma when we were told it wasn't systemically distributed. We can now say definitively from a government document it is systemically distributed. Between 1 and 4 hours after the dose. So it was floating all around the body because, of course, the plasma, the liquid part of the blood, goes absolutely everywhere, apart from the clear part in the front of your eyes. All the living tissues, the plasma goes there. This is widely distributed, as we'll see, and distributed mainly into the liver. So the liver was high concentrations, relatively high concentrations, adrenal glands, spleen, and ovaries over 48 hours. Now, of course, the ovaries store and mature the ovum. So I'm not going to pretend I'm not a little concerned about this. I am more than a little concerned, actually. And we can now say this from government data. Quite what this means, of course, we don't yet fully understand. Let's hope we don't ever fully understand, because let's hope it goes away, but I suspect it might not. Concentrations were higher in the plasma than in the blood, so when they isolated the plasma, the liquid part of the blood from the cells and everything, there was still a lot of concentration in the plasma itself. And the plasma, of course, is, as we said, goes all around the body. It's what the red cells and the white cells float in. More distribution data all around the body. This is from page 40 of the report. Do check it out. Distribution of lipid nanoparticles or expressed spike protein was not studied. So they actually didn't study the expression of spike protein. It was just the radioactive markers for the lipid nanoparticles that they studied. You would have thought that they would study the amount of spike protein the mRNA would make, but the document is clearly saying that was not studied. My question is, why not? This is table 4.2, which I'm going to show you. And again, radioactive concentration as a proxy for lipid nanoparticle distribution after intramuscular injection. This is assuming it's done properly into a muscle. Mean total radioactivity was greatest at the injection site. Fair enough. That's good. That's good. That's where we want it. But it was followed by the liver, with much lower concentrations in the spleen, adrenal glands and ovaries, but still concentration there, but higher concentration in the liver. Tissue distribution pattern was similar in a 100 microgram dose as a 50 microgram dose. In other words, the smaller dose gave a similar tissue distribution of lipid nanoparticles. Again, concerning. Even the smaller dose, the distribution was similar. Why wasn't it done on smaller doses? Again, we don't know. Highest distribution into the liver, adrenal glands and spleen, as we said. Now, the conclusion they drew here, Slow but significant distribution of lipid nanoparticles from the site of injection with major uptake to the liver. I don't like the sound of major uptake to the liver at all. It means these lipid nanoparticles were circulating around the liver in relatively high concentration. That means that the lipid nanoparticles would fuse with the walls of the hepatocytes and the hepatic capillaries. And in fact, in the liver, the blood comes into direct contact with the liver cells. It's one of the few places in the body where there's what we call fenestrated capillaries with gaps in the capillaries. That means that the mRNA could go into the vascular endothelial cells and the liver, into the hepatocytes themselves, produce the spike protein that would be expressed, and there will be an inflammatory reaction against that spike protein in the liver. This is not what we were told. How could the Australian authorities know this in January 2021 and still approve this vaccine is a question for the Australian authorities. And as we say, the equivalent data was available in the United States, the United Kingdom, everywhere. This is worse than I had hoped to report, to be quite honest. Mean plasma ratios, this is just saying that there was more lipid nanoparticles in the plasma than in the blood. So it was circulating in the plasma rather than in the blood, rather than related to the red blood cells. Now I have a table here with all the organs where this was distributed. It is here, and I've blown it up a bit for you so you can see this. Pretty alarming. It's basically going to a lot of organs. So these are the list of organs where there was data for distribution. Adipose tissue is fat. The lipid nanoparticles went there, unfortunately. Adrenal glands, bladder, bone, the femur, they checked. Bone marrow. Bone marrow is I find it particularly uncomfortable that the lipid nanoparticles went to the bone marrow, because that's where all the blood cells are produced. Not speculating on what that could cause, but they went there. Therefore, the RNA that they contained went there as well. This is the point here. Particles went to the brain, the eyes, the heart, at the injection site, of course. And we do notice it was high concentrations at the injection site, but the point is it was systemically distributed as well. Kidneys, large intestine, liver, lungs, lymph nodes, mandibular, that's under the jaw, mesenteric, that's associated with the gut, muscle, ovaries, pancreas. It went to all of these organs. Pituitary gland, the master of the endocrine orchestra, relatively high concentrations in the pituitary gland. Prostate gland in men, lower concentration. Salivary gland, skin, small intestine, spinal cord, spleen, stomach, testes. Concerning. Thymus gland behind the sternum, thyroid gland in the neck, uterus, whole blood, plasma, and that gives the ratio. So we do see that these concentrations are in all of these organs. Now this table here gives, if you want to see it, it's I mean, you could do a screenshot of that if you wanted to, but it's all, I've given you the reference for it. They're all the full concentrations of the distribution of the lipid nanoparticle radioactivity after particular periods of time. So let's just give one example here, the liver. There's the data there. So at 25 minutes, it was 0.74. Now, the units here are micrograms of lipid equivalent per gram, or in the case of the blood, presumably per mil. So way higher than I would have anticipated. 25 minutes, it was 0.74. 1 hour, 4.6. 2 hours, it's still going up. 4 hours, it's still going up. 8 hours, it's still going up. 24 hours, it looks like it's gone down a bit, 19.24, but at 48 hours, still 24.29. So it looks like it's kind of stabilized there in the 8 to 24 hour period. So the obvious question is, why did they only go up to 48 hours? Why didn't they keep testing? until the concentrations went down. So what we can say is the substantial numbers of lipid nanoparticles with the messenger RNA coding for the spike protein in the liver at 48 hours. What about 3 days? What about 4 days? Didn't seem to be done. And bear in mind, all this was known before the vaccines were approved. Before all this was known before the vaccines were approved. Struggling for words. Now, metabolism, how much it's broken down. This is from page 46. In vitro in life studies indicated minor metabolism. Now, these are the lipids, the experimental lipids that we used in the liver, with most of the lipid found unchanged at the end of 2 to 4 hour incubation period. So very short time. So what they found was in the liver that not only did the lipid nanoparticles persist in quite large amounts for up to 48 hours, at least 48 hours. As well as that, the fats themselves were not significantly denatured at 4 hours, 2 to 4 hours. So the fat was still in the original, more or less in the original format. And the lipid nanoparticles still there in high concentrations after 48 hours when testing ceased. So there we go. We can say definitively from a government document that the lipid nanoparticles and therefore the messenger RNA that is contained is distributed to all of these organs. We were told it wasn't, but now we know it was. So what someone needs to do now, really, I haven't had time to do this today, but look back to people in authority who said this wasn't systemically distributed. And given that this report is from the TGA on January 2021, anyone who said that after January 2021, well, the best thing we can say is they were poorly informed, isn't it? But if they're in authority, they shouldn't have been poorly informed. I put this question to Senator Rennick yesterday in our interview, which I hope he got a chance to see. I said, really, you'd expect the TGA to go the extra mile to work out this is safe because they were going to give this vaccine to everyone in Australia, pretty well everyone in Australia. They should have gone the extra mile, I said, and he said, no, it's not a matter of going the extra mile. This was their job. This is what they should have done anyway. And of course, that applies to CDC, FDA, Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority, everyone. So it looks like all of these authorities have approved these vaccines. And of course, at this time, January 21, we'd already started the vaccination program in the UK. And yet, if Australia's anything to go by, this information was on people's desks. Meaning, in my view, there's questions to answer. I don't expect they ever will be. This won't get to mainstream media, of course. But it's a government document, therefore I am allowed to talk about it. Well, welcome to today's talk. It's Saturday the 25th of March, not May, as I said yesterday. And I've been carrying on wading through this report here from the Therapeutic Goods Administration from Australia, the authorising body in Australia. And I've put the link to the full report, which is now in the public domain. When I say full report, it's not actually a full report. It's got some redacted sections, which, given the information that's in this report and some of the stuff I'm about to reveal to you today, it just makes you wonder what is in the redacted content. It really does. But let's get straight down into some of the things that this report is saying. And remember, of course, this was submitted by the TGA in Australia based on Pfizer's information about the vaccines in January 2021. So when they were rolling out the very early stages of the vaccine programme in the UK, all this information, we have to assume, was known by the UK authorities. And yet they still carried on with the vaccination programme. We assume it was known by all of the US authorities as well, because it's basically information that's related to the vaccine. If the TGA has it, then I think we can assume that all the civilized countries in the world had it, New Zealand, Canada, all of Europe, and yet they ploughed on with this. And the thing that's really intolerable about this is we weren't told. If we'd known this at the time, things would have, information would have been processed differently, shall we say. But of course it didn't. Let's get straight on to the business. Page 4. Almost similar microscopic lung inflammation was observed in both challenge control and immunised animals, monkeys, poor things, after the peak of infection, days 7 to 8. So these animals were deliberately infected. Now, what this is actually saying is that if animals were vaccinated or not, they still had minimal lung inflammation. And I think we can assume that they were inoculated with the Wuhan variety of the original variant of the virus. So in other words, what this is saying is somewhat obscure language. This is challenged with infection. So the virus was given to these poor monkeys, and they were unvaccinated. And they had almost similar microscopic lung inflammation as opposed to those challenged with the virus that had been vaccinated. So we see that the lung inflammation in the vaccinated and unvaccinated was the same. Based on this, they decided that the vaccine was sufficiently efficacious to carry on with the vaccination program. Strange but true. Page 4 again. There is no distribution and degradation data on the spike antigen encoding messenger ribonucleic acid, the mRNA. So they don't know where this goes, no distribution, and they don't know how long it lasts for. It doesn't degrade. Does it degrade in 5 minutes? Does it degrade in 5 years? Both of those are absurd, of course, but where does it fall between those? There's no data. So the decision was made on no data. You couldn't make this up. So it's a new viral therapy that uses intracellular pathways to access the ribosomes in the cell. So this is what happens, of course. So here we have the cell, and on the cell there's normally some and in the cell there's this endoplasmic reticulum, this network of membranes, and on here there's it's called rough endoplasmic reticulum. This thing's called ribosomes, and these are the protein making factories. So we assume that the RNA from the vaccine, there's the lipid nanoparticle there with the RNA that goes into these ribosomes. The ribosomes make the protein, and that then exports this spike protein that sits on the surface of the cell. That's the way it's working. It's taking over these intracellular mechanisms. Now we know from page, so that's how it's working, but they're not concerned that they don't know where it's going and how long it's lasting for. See, if this RNA lasts for a few hours, as we were originally told, and then this spike protein goes again after a few hours, the damage would probably be minimal. Or is it longer than that? Oh, don't know, mate. Sorry, we don't know that. And we know from page 45 that the lipid nanoparticles are systemically distributed. So we looked yesterday. This is the systemic distribution of the lipid nanoparticles. It goes basically all around the body, in the blood, brain, eyes, heart, kidneys, large intestine, liver, lungs, testis, ovaries. It goes all around the body. So we know that the lipid nanoparticles go all around the body. And assuming that this document has internal validity, it's not contradicting itself, we're assuming that the spike protein that the RNA produces, distribution is not tested. So we know where the lipid nanoparticles go, everywhere. But having known that the lipid nanoparticles go everywhere, they didn't bother testing to see where the mRNA goes or where the spike protein produced by the mRNA goes. This is quite incredible. But given that the lipid nanoparticles go everywhere, I think we have to assume that the mRNA and the consequent spike protein produced by the mRNA goes everywhere. Page 5. Antibodies and T cells in monkeys decline quickly over 5 weeks. So the antibodies And these protective T cells, remember these T lymphocytes, these small lymphocytes, how long did this last for? Well, they decline quickly over 5 weeks. 5 weeks? What's 7 5s? 35 days? Is it? Yeah. Raising concerns over long-term immunity. So the report specifically says this raises concerns over long-term immunity. Having raised concerns over long-term immunity, the vaccines were authorised by the TGA. And as we say, presumably all the other agencies. Page 6. A few unknowns were identified by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Short-term protection studies only. That means long-term, who knows? Because these were only short-term studies. But we do know the protection was declining after 5 weeks. Lack of pharmacokinetic data for the S-antigen encoding mRNA. So in pharmacology, basically, there's two terms. There's pharmacodynamics. Pharmacodynamics is the way a drug affects the body. Pharmacokinetics is the way that the body affects the drug. So, for example, if you drink alcohol, you should probably excrete about 1 unit of that alcohol per hour. That's the kinetics, the pharmacokinetics of alcohol. What's the pharmacokinetics? How does the body break down the S-antigen encoding messenger RNA? Not tested, basically. Lack of knowledge on that. Based on that, they authorised the mass administration of the vaccines. Suboptimal dosing intervals in the repeat dose study. Genotoxicity with novel excipients. So genotoxicity, how is this affecting the genes? Now, these excipients, an excipient is a substance formulated alongside the active ingredient, included in the preparation. And excipients can do various useful things. But were these excipients affecting, for example, were they having a toxic effect on genetic material? Well, I don't know, because genotoxicity wasn't done. So having noted the deficiency, noted the lack of data, you see, we were told at the time, and this is what really grates on me, I took all these senior scientists at their word. I took the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation at their word. Because they said everything that is normally done was done. They told us that. And at the time we knew we couldn't know all of that. The papers probably weren't published. But now we find out there's the studies lacked investigation into potential autoimmune disease. If we'd been told this at the time, then my videos could have been different. The behaviour of the world could have been different. Why weren't we told? A few more. Page 6. Still unknowns. Long-term immunity, don't know, wasn't done. Wasn't studied for long enough. Vaccine-induced autoimmune disease were not studied in the non-clinical programme. Go. Page 8. Pfizer vaccine, immunisation also included induced pro-inflammatory cytokines. So we know cytokines now probably. Cytokines are chemicals released by one cell that affects another cell. Some of them promote inflammation, some of them reduce inflammation. The vaccine here, we're told, produces pro-inflammatory cytokines, so it increases inflammation. Again, we weren't told that in January 2021. The information was there in January 2021, but we weren't told by any of our regulatory authorities. The TGA didn't report it to the Australian people. The Food and Drug Administration, CDC lot, didn't report it to the American people, the various regulatory authorities in the UK. If they reported it, I missed it. Anyway, let's carry on. So, pro-inflammatory effects. Now, page 9. One study found that among people who'd recovered from COVID-19, 100% had S protein specific CD4 cells. Now, these CD4 cells are the T helper lymphocytes. So with lymphocytes, the small lymphocytes can be B. So these are the lymphocytes. these blood cells, and they can be T or they can be B. The T mature in the thymus, the B mature in the bone marrow. The T can be helpers, which are that's those ones, the CD4 plus, they have a CD4 receptor. The T cells can be cytotoxic, CYTO, CYTOTOXIC, CYTO, spelling's gone to pot, never mind. Or they can be suppressors, suppressor cells. Now, the helper cells are essential because the helper cells, what the helper cells do is they stimulate the B cells, and it's the B cells that produce the antibodies. Billions of them. Immune proteins, the immunoglobulins. So one study found that among people who had recovered from COVID-19, this is natural infection, 100%, absolutely every single one of the subjects had S protein specific CD4 T cells that would instruct the B cells to make the antibodies. So they knew that natural immunity produced a helper T cell response in 100% of recipients. And also, their studies showed in the circulation, 70% had the protein-specific CD8 plus cell. Now, the CD8 plus cell is the cytotoxics, these cytotoxic cells. So the cytotoxic cells, as we've said, if a cell is infected with the virus, so here's the viruses in here, taking over and reproducing inside the cells, then what the cytotoxic cell does is it chucks a hand grenade in and kills the whole cell. It actually drops toxic chemicals on it, kills the whole cell. But of course, then it kills the viruses as well. Very, very effective. And 70% of subjects had that. So in other words, natural immunity was going to be producing antibodies in 100% of subjects. 100% of subjects. And cytotoxic cells identified in 70%. And yet autoimmunity, I was looking at, not autoimmunity, sorry, natural immunity. Natural immunity was not mentioned, as far as I can recall, in any of the press conferences from Downing Street with a chief scientific and chief medical officer. Natural immunity has just basically not been mentioned. It was all vaccines, 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 vaccines. What about natural immunity? Especially as we got on to the age of Omicron. Why were the authorities essentially silent on natural immunity? And shall we say somewhat vocal on vaccination? Surely it would have been good to have natural immunity as well, especially as this study showed how incredibly effective it was. So there we go. Lots of things that weren't known, lots of things about the vaccine that we're simply ignorant about, lots of things that were known that, for example, it was pro-inflammatory, lots of studies that weren't done. Natural immunity demonstrated to be incredibly effective. All this was known in the first month or two of the vaccine rollout in the UK. In the United States, January 2021, that's when the vaccine rollout started. All this information was known at that time.
The father of the vaccine, because I was the one that pushed it. You know, to get it done in less than 9 months was a miracle. Fauci said it would take 3 to 5 years. He thought it was something that just wouldn't be that effective because it would take so long to get. I pushed the FDA like they have never been pushed before. I wouldn't exactly say they're in love with me. They have never. This is a very bureaucratic organization. I pushed them like they've never been pushed before, and that's why we have it. When they did the pause on Johnson & Johnson, I thought that was a very, very stupid thing to do.
Would you recommend to our audience that they get the vaccine then?
I would.
We are doing something that has never been done before. This is a historic moment and an historic process where people get to say how this goes. And I really want to emphasize that. I think we're so used to sitting back and watching, something happening out there and hoping for the best or being cynical about what might or might not be done. This is not that. This has never been done before. This is an opportunity for us to exercise our democratic muscles.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News to bring you an overview of the National Citizens Inquiry that kicked off last week in Nova Scotia. The NCI is an independent, citizen-led inquiry into the unprecedented federal and provincial government's COVID-19 related policies and response plans. The NCI website says that these interventions into Canadians' lives, our families, businesses, and communities were, and to a great extent remain, significant. In particular, these interventions impacted the physical and mental health, civil liberties and fundamental freedoms, jobs and livelihoods, and overall social and economic well-being of nearly all Canadians. If you're not familiar with this initiative, how the investigation is structured, and what will come out on the other side, then stay tuned as I catch up with spokeswoman for the NCI, Michelle Leduc-Catlin, for more information and to obtain a general recap on how the proceedings that took place in Nova Scotia on March 16th, 17th, and 18th went. Check it out.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me here. The National Citizens Inquiry is a citizen-led, citizen-funded inquiry into the government's response to COVID-19.
And now hearings have kicked off in Nova Scotia this past week and weekend. Before we get into how that went, you have appointed some commissioners here to oversee the testimony that will be going coast to coast over the next month and a bit. How were those individuals appointed?
Well, much like the rest of the inquiry, they were, commissioners applied, some were approached, some were nominated. The idea was to find people who the citizens of Canada would trust to give an honest, objective opinion.
And now, so these are, like lawyers, judges, what is the structure like of these hearings as they proceed?
So it's much like a public inquiry where the commissioners are all listening to testimony under oath. They are taking notes, they are listening to evidence, and they are collecting evidence as well from the lawyers who are presenting the case. And they will submit a report at the end of this with recommendations for what we did right, what we did wrong, what could be done better, how do we proceed into the future.
And unlike the Public Emergency Order Commission, for instance, which saw a Trudeau appointee oversee the entire process, this is, like you've already mentioned, completely citizen-led. And so these commissioners were chosen based on, merit or how, what were the credentials involved there in their final choosings?
Yeah, definitely trustworthiness, credibility. I mean, there is a lawyer, there is an engineer, there's an academic. It's a broad range of people, but all very well respected in their fields. In terms of, citizen-led, this is really key. Like you said, the Emergencies Act Commission was the government inspecting the government, right? And we are doing something that has never been done before. This is a historic moment and an historic process where people get to say how this goes. And I really want to emphasize that. I think we're so used to sitting back and watching, something happening out there and hoping for the best or being cynical about what might or might not be done. This is not that. This has never been done before. This is an opportunity for us to exercise our democratic muscles by participating, by going to the website, nationalcitizensinquiry.ca, sign the petition at the very least, volunteer if you can, donate if you're able. We have to pay for this event to happen across the country, and we want to have all Canadians' voices heard. That's the other piece, is that anyone can apply to be heard, to testify. And people who felt that they haven't been heard over the last 3 years are having their voices heard. And honestly, if there is anything I could recommend to anybody, please go and listen to these people's testimonies. These people's voices need to be heard. Your voice needs to be heard.
Is there a testimony, or are there a broad range of things that you're looking for in terms of what you want to hear from the citizens who bring their stories forward in terms of how the COVID response really affected them?
In fact, a poll was done, and 3 out of 4 Canadians said that the mandates, the policies the government implemented affected them negatively, that they were harmed by the policy. So why aren't we hearing these voices? These are the voices that need to be heard. In terms of what we're looking for what people need, want to express. So social impacts, financial impacts, physical, emotional, mental health impacts, all of it. In addition, we're hearing from world-class experts in everything from vaccine, laboratory protocols, to emergency room physicians and their response, their experience. So it is a very broad range of experts. We want to hear from anyone who wants to be heard.
Now, in Canada and arguably other places, North America as a whole, saw unprecedented censorship throughout the COVID narrative. And anyone who kind of questioned the status quo or went against that one-sided mainstream narrative was slandered, smeared, silenced. Have you found that that has played a role in the amount or willingness of people to come forward to fill these roles?
Most definitely. And there are two things that strike me. One is that a number of the doctors are either leaving their province or leaving their practice as a result of censorship for what they believe were speaking out ethically, for speaking out in integrity with what they have been taught, with their own values. And that's a really disturbing thing that I noticed in the first round of hearings. The second thing is that many people are not coming forward for that very reason. Many people whose businesses suffered don't want their business to suffer further. So they're not coming forward, but we're hearing a lot of anecdotal evidence, particularly from the people who are now representing their constituency. So doctors who are speaking out where other doctors aren't, veterans who are speaking out where others aren't.
And speaking of constituents, we have elected officials, politicians who are supposed to speak on our behalf. What's the feedback been like there from any levels of government? You know, are they paying attention to this? Will they pay attention? What is the forethought there moving forward, trying to get this recognized on a political official level?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. There has been no response, but I want to be really clear that they have been invited. We want to hear all sides of the story. We want people to testify. We want the truth to come out. That's the ultimate goal. So will they testify? Will they acknowledge the inquiry? That's a question you'll have to ask them.
Yes, that's part of where the people, citizens, can get involved as well. Now, going back to these hearings that just took place a mere few days ago in Nova Scotia, can you give us a recap of what exactly what that looked like, and maybe some highlights in terms of the testimony that was received then?
You know, I said to someone, you could write a book about every day of the hearings. There was so much. And honestly, if I was going to put together a course on civics, I would have everybody watch every day of the hearings. It was so compelling. In terms of how it works, everyone is sworn in. This is sworn testimony. They are cross-examined by a lawyer. The commissioners are there. The commissioners can ask questions and do. And we've even taken questions from the audience, the people attending the hearings. So if people want to ask a question, those will be presented to the witnesses as well. In terms of highlights, my biggest takeaway, one, is that we are losing our best and our brightest. That the people who have the moral courage to stand up for what they believe in are the ones we are firing, are the ones who are leaving, the nurses, the paramedics, the doctors, the professors, all the people who are actually doing critical thinking and just asking questions are being censored and eliminated. So that's one of the biggest highlights. But I think more importantly, in some sense, is the heartbreaking stories of ordinary Canadians who all, whether they chose to get vaccinated or not get vaccinated, all believed they were doing the right thing and have suffered enormous hardships as a result. I can't even begin to go into the stories that we heard. And this is just the first round of hearings. Also the impact on children. you know, to hear from a teacher who teaches grade 1 and 2 about the emotional, cognitive decline, about the fear these children were living in, walking around afraid that they were going to spread disease and kill people. I mean, it's impossible to encapsulate in a few words, a few minutes.
Yeah, the inhumane response was truly remarkable. How we got this far is still mind-boggling to me. And I guess a large part of that is because of censorship and the slandering and smearing of anyone who came out in opposition. What does the next series of hearings look like? Where are you going next? Can you give us sort of a play-by-play of dates and locations?
Yes, so we are next in Toronto. So that's March 30th to April 1st. Most of the hearing dates go Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we are in Toronto. We take a break for Easter weekend, and the following weekend we are in Winnipeg, and then Saskatoon, Red Deer. In BC, it'll be split between Victoria and Vancouver. Then we head back east to Quebec, and we will end in Ottawa.
The nation's capital. Are you hoping that by that point back in Ottawa, you'll have garnered some sort of political recognition?
I think we're going to gain a lot of momentum. I think when people hear these stories, they will feel compelled to talk about it, to share the stories, to demand that some actions be taken. I really just want to reiterate that this has never been done before, that Canada is leading the way here, that we have created this grassroots citizen-led movement to have the truth be told, you know, to create a record of history, to create a record of what happened, what we can do better. That's what we do. I really believe that this is an opportunity for Canadians to demonstrate the kindness and compassion that we're known for.
If you want to get involved with the NCI, you can sign up to partake in proceedings or simply watch either in person or online. The testimonies and hearings are live streamed daily, and clips of key speakers will be posted on the NCI's various social media pages. We plan to cover these proceedings of great public interest, brought forward with the intention of creating a public record and future recommendations. So please subscribe and follow our coverage at rebelnews.com. I'm Tamara Ugolini, and thank you for supporting our work at Rebel News.
Hi, I'm back. It's day 3 of the National Citizens Inquiry first round of hearings in Truro, Nova Scotia. I don't even know where to begin with how much got covered today. I have to say that Dr. Laura Braden, she spent an hour giving us a science lesson that was well over my head, but some of the things that came out of it were that tests that, you know, in terms of impact of the vaccines, the trial tests, that there were parts of the test that were stopped after 48 hours. There were sample sizes of rats that were 3 rats. I mean, there were just huge quality assurance issues that she spoke of, huge concerns about autoimmune development as a result of the lack of standards, the injections containing contaminants. She called the testing abhorrent. There was another word she used, abysmal. You know, and she made a really good comparison. You know, when you go and buy Tylenol, you expect it to be Tylenol every time, and you expect it to be 400 milligrams every time, but that's not the case with the injections. They vary wildly based on really poor quality control. She was tremendous. She said that her conclusion was things are not what they seem to be, which was frightening. She said they do not contain what we think they do. She also, when she was asked questions by some of the commissioners, she talked about, you know, how masking doesn't help, and she cited a study that she believes was written or co-authored by Dr. Teresa Tam. So that was a little interesting thing. And she talked about, you know, what things could be done differently in terms of not having censorship of scientists, that we really need discourse. So many of the doctors have talked about that, just the silencing of them. So many doctors I mean, today there were doctors who have left the profession entirely. They're so disillusioned. One of them even switched careers, went back to school, went to law school to cover medical malpractice. So these are life-changing times for many people. There's a doctor who's worked in the military for 20 years and as a doctor for 10, who talked about the mental health issues. I mean, mental health issues we're seeing across the board, but he was talking about in the military specifically and the dangerous threat that poses to national security. He also, and many doctors have also talked about this, about hunkering down, waiting for this deluge of COVID patients, and no one showed up. He actually said he never saw a COVID patient until January 2022. So that's after the vaccine rollout. Until then, he'd never seen a COVID patient. There was, I feel very strongly about this. I don't think it's ever appropriate for personal medical choices to be, treated this way. Many of the doctors talked about this. There were so many ethical issues that the doctors had problems with. The problem of, you never ever present a patient with a medical intervention where you judge them or insist that they take it, or don't give them a risk assessment, don't give them, the pros and cons of taking this medical intervention. That was really disturbing for many doctors. I mean, it's disturbing for all of us, I think. And of course, there was testimony that I think most people know about now from Jordan Peterson. There was a pre-recorded video that that was submitted, and that was quite damning about tyrannical measures taken by the government. And that was one of the themes across the board, is that it's not just that the government put out these mandates that had no basis in science, but that the panic and the fear that was perpetuated had a kind of trickle-down effect, so that the further down the mandates went, the more people kind of added on for extra protection, to the point where it made absolutely no sense. I mean, there were absurdities, and many people pointed to the hypocrisy and the absurdities of measures that weren't even mandated, that people just made up. Okay, I just have to touch on this one. There was a woman from Nova Scotia Health Authority who had data. She had access to data from all across the province, and she pulled the numbers out of spreadsheets. And what she said was that what the media was reporting was absolutely an exaggeration. The numbers did not add up, not even close to what the media was saying. We heard a letter read from a parent who was advocating for a teacher who was going to be let go because of her vax status. And these parents rallied around her, writing letters and talking about how wonderful she was. And still, the school didn't keep her. Just one tragedy after another. And yet, so much hope in being able to have their testimonies heard. I can't tell you how many times I cried today. It was hard to hold back the tears throughout the last 3 days with the testimonies we heard, with both vaccinated and unvaccinated people being so horribly treated in the medical system because of fear. The unvaccinated, because even the health staff were so afraid that it's like they put aside their oaths in the way they treated people. And the vaccinated who were injured and treated as if they were somehow traitors to their side of the narrative. And that's really one of the things that is emerging, is how much people took sides regardless of what evidence they were seeing, and started treating people differently based on their vaccination status. I think that the panic is one of the biggest things that we hear over and over again. The loss of trust of the government, of the healthcare system, of the media is enormous. And also how we are losing our best and brightest. You know, the people who have had the integrity to stick by their principles are the ones we're losing. They're being weeded out. So just that, regardless of what you think about people's personal medical choices, we are losing great people, vaxxed and unvaxxed doctors, by the way. I feel like, personally, I could write a book not just about the first 3 days of these hearings, but one day, just one day, there's so much testimony, there's so many compelling stories that you could write a book about each and every day. You could write about each and every person. I'm not even talking about some of the people we heard from that deserve to have their voices heard. It's just impossible. It is humbling to see people standing up, risking everything, careers, family, relationships, friends, just to speak out about the harms that have been done to them. I think this whole tour of Canada is an opportunity for Canadians to come together. I've said it before, to demonstrate the kindness and compassion that we're known for. I think that this is an opportunity for us to heal the divisions that have been created over the last 3 years. And it's not going to be the government that does it, it's going to be us. I am Michelle Leduc-Catlin, and it is an honor to be here representing the National Citizens Inquiry. Thank you so much for watching.
All my rules begin to howl. Wake me up, the time is now. Can you hear the drumming? There's a revolution coming. Wide awake, the fever burns. Sweat it out, wait my turn. Can you hear the drumming? There's a revolution coming. All this doubt is creeping in, inside out. Shed my skin. Been